Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Blabbie, brought to you by Open Doors, your premier communication consulting. Good morning. How's everyone doing today?
We're doing pretty well, Glenn. Good to see you. Good to see the return of our favorite story spotter as well.
The only one, your only story spotter, Paul. Be honest about this.
Well, that's what my mother would always say.
Yeah.
You know, I have three younger sisters, and she would say, "Oh, my favorite son."
Exactly right.
It's
great to see you
he's
guys.
our favorite Brit, even though he's our only Brit.
You're only that's because I was buttering you up about the Midwest.
There you go.
Okay. Is it my turn, Glenn, or yours?
It's mine. Welcome,
You got it.
everyone, to Blabbie. For those of us who have not been there in the past, or those of you who have not, my name is Glenn Ingram. I've been working with helping people increase their sales acumen by becoming better listeners and better influencers for the last 20 years. Paul, how about yourself?
Well, I am the same Paul Geiger that was here in Blabbit last week, and I am a public speaking coach and a presentation expert out of New York City. And I work with organizations and individuals to really be able to promote their senior level visibility using communication skills. I always say it makes you feel good, makes you feel confident, and makes you feel like you're getting the respect you deserve if you speak well. Speaking of someone who speaks well, you like how I segued into that?
I love it.
David, please tell everyone who hasn't met you before what.
Hi, everyone. Hi, my name's David Pullan, and as far as I know, I'm one of only 2 story spotters in the world. I'm pretty sure of that because my wife is the other one. And our business is called the Story Spotters, and our mission in life is to help you save your great messages from a very horrible death. There's a lot of noise out there, and we don't want those messages crashing on the rocks. That's what we do for you through the power of story.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thanks for coming on again, David.
Pleasure.
You know, I have a quick question as we open this up. You know, we've all seen the exercise where you get 10 people in a line, you say something to the first person, and trying to figure out what gets discombobulated by the time the 10th person hears this. So understanding that's a built-in human trait, if you will, what do we need to do as leaders to make sure that we communicate in a manner that is going to resonate and is going to be remembered?
Well, you know what I'm going to say, aren't you? Yeah, I'm going to say you're going to tell stories, but there's good scientific reasons why you should be telling stories, because it's the way that it's the way that we process our lives, essentially. I mean, we walk out into the world and I think to myself, oh, I want to talk to Paul and Glenn in a couple of minutes time, and then but I haven't actually sorted out my Wi-Fi connection here, therefore I better move a bit quicker now. It's sort of, there's a narrative structure to our lives which is about problem solving, and that's essentially what a story is a narrative structure of events in search of an answer to a problem. And so you just give facts to people. Those facts have a pretty short half-life in people's brains, whereas a story, especially a well-told story, is vivid. It's told often. There's a great book I read recently called Narrative Economics by a guy called Robert Shiller, who he won the Nobel Peace Prize for it, actually. And it's basically about how things like trickle-down economics, things like Bitcoin, all the non-fungible token stuff that's going on, essentially they become movements in the world. They become changes in the world because of the stories that get told about them. I mean, there are many things that are told about Satoshi Nakamoto, who invented Bitcoin. We don't even know if he actually existed, but there are great vivid stories. So the more vivid and more often your stories are told, then the more they are remembered, people. And a story isn't what people hear, it's what they repeat.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Paul, real quick here. Christopher said, if no one remembers it, is it really great?
Exactly right. No, exactly. If no one remembers it, well, it isn't great. I mean, like I say, Christopher, I mean, it's not so much about it's not about whether did people hear your story, because you just got to open your mouth. Are they repeating your story afterwards? I agree, and I hope we'll get into some of that on today's program. Is what makes a well-told story that really stands out in people's minds.
Well, let's just take a closer look at that. What about giving yourself permission to actually use stories? Isn't there a little bit of a stigma, and I know you run into this, that keep it just to the facts back up my opinion, in business, particularly in business. We think of storytelling. For many people, the imagery is someone sitting around on a bar stool telling stories, and
Yeah.
just very light, in a very lighthearted way. They could even be boastful tall tales, but do they really have a place? And how do we give ourselves permission? Is there validation that goes into a story? I mean, I understand the people you work with look to you for that
Yeah.
validation, but how do we self-evaluate what it is that we're doing, telling the story?
Self-evaluate in terms of,
In other words, is it a good story?
well, there's a whole pile of stuff, and I hope we'll talk about that over the course of the next hour or so. But I mean,
Mhm.
it's a good story. I mean, as Christopher just said before, I mean, it's a good story. And I've had situations where I've heard a story being told back to me that has actually originated from some of my clients. I mean, there are elements to stories. I mean, essentially, what is a story? A story is a sequence of events. That in its
Right.
most basic image, basic element, the story is a sequence of events leading to a conclusion. But the way that you actually structure that, it starts with a time and a place and a character who we follow through, who has problems that they come up against. And that's a very important point, actually. I'd really like to think about that today, about, a story that just goes and then I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this, is a sequence of events. It's just not a very good story, because the emotional hook for the story is people overcoming things.
Mhm.
We would never go and see any movies if it was just sort of a person woke up one day and had breakfast and went to work and came home and then went to bed. Something bad gets in the way. And then Liam Neeson sorts it out.
Because of his special set of skills.
Exactly right. But we can adapt that basic idea into business as well. People want to hear about the problems. They don't want to see I do a lot of work with values, actually. I'm about to go to France, actually, and work with an organization about the stories that they tell about themselves around their values. And the thing that I'm really encouraging them to do with that particular workshop and the exercise generally is, let's see where those values were really stretched. Where was it difficult to put your values into practice? Because that really means it's a value if it stands up under pressure. Let's see some of those burning towers and crashing planes that got in the way of your values actually standing up.
Well, it's interesting that we're talking about stories. I was just in a conversation yesterday where I was talking about this because, no matter what we're doing in life, we're always selling, we're always influencing, we're always persuading. And I made the comment that I follow college football in the States quite a bit. And I've had the chance to get to know some of the better recruiters, if you will, in the world or in the
Mm.
country. And they are amazing storytellers, talking to young men, talking to their parents. And I think that's why they are great recruiters, to convince parents, convince these young men to spend the next 3, 4, 5 years of their
Yeah.
lives with the university. So let's kind of dig into storytelling a little bit more, if you will, because I would tell some stories that I've heard from some coaches told recruits, but we don't have enough time to go over those things. But when you can relate to that parent, when you can relate to that 18-year-old by telling a story, that's where the bond really begins and consummates.
And interestingly there, Glenn, I mean, it's a story. I'd never even thought of that. I bet they're really good at that, because essentially there are two ways we can experience things in life. We can either actually go and do it and spend our 3 years at that particular college, or we can hear the story of it. And when that story is well told, our mind can't differentiate between, am I actually doing it, or am I just hearing about it? So the same chemicals are driven in the brain and sort of get set off in the brain by hearing a well-told story about what it's been for other students or other recruits who have a similar, who are similar to the person who is telling the story. So I mean, that's the character we follow through. It's like, do you know, I had a kid who was very similar to you, came from a very small town, and he decided to come to us, and then this, and the first weeks weren't easy, but he made whatever it was. I mean, just anything that makes us go, oh yeah, I can imagine myself doing that. That's a powerful story.
The best one wasn't even that. The best one was, this young man was talking to a recruit and told him, if you don't come to our school, I'm going to jump off the top of the stadium. And comes in to talk to this guy. They really want to convince the family how important they are. So he said, I told you I was going to do this. He goes, but I have 2 small children. So, and he does a good job of building everything up and talking about how much he's depending on it. And he pulls up his arm and goes, "So I had this tattoo made with your name on it." And the family goes wild. Of course, it was a temporary tattoo, but again, it was a story, commitment, enticement, the whole ball of wax.
Do you know that's fantastic, and I'll tell you why. I mean, because it's interesting we talk about story, and I would like to think about story in three ways, in some way, in three different ways. There's a narrative, which is sort of like the overarching, journey of the story. Think of that like the Christmas tree. Then there are the stories which have a beginning, middle, and end, which start with person, time, and place, and everything. Those are like the decorations that hang off that Christmas tree. But then there are the other things, and that what you're demonstrating there, Glenn, is what I would call microscripts or micro stories. They're like, I've got a tattoo on my arm here with your name on it. That in itself is a piece of information, but it's such a visual piece, literally a visual piece of information, that your mind immediately spirals into a bunch of connections and going, wow, this guy really rates me. This guy really wants me. He's really 100% in. He's all in for me being at this college. And so we create our own story on our head, triggered by an action or a microscript, a micro story that the other person has planted there for you. And it's a very well, advertising is essentially based on it.
Mm-hmm.
Melts in your mouth, not in your hand.
Sometimes I feel like a nut.
Right.
Sometimes I don't.
Yeah.
So let me ask you something, David, about storytelling and about, again, I want to go back to the feeling of giving ourselves permission to tell stories.
Yeah.
Isn't it very rare that anybody says, "Oh, tell me a story"? In other words, the insertion of a story has to be, you have to be the forward momentum that integrates that story into either a presentation, into a conversation. Very rarely are you given permission. You have to give yourself permission to insert in.
I think there are two things to say about that, Paul. You do have to give yourself permission, and the way you give yourself permission is to realize that whatever you say to people, they are going to turn it into a story anyway. I mean, if I was to say the words to you guys, I don't know if you noticed, but Paul's van was parked outside Karen's house last night. What do you think's going on? I mean, you could sort of think, Paul's having an affair with Karen, or you might think that Paul's, van broke down outside there, or that his regular parking space, whatever happened, you set a context, you set a problem, you have a conclusion to it in a microsecond. It's what we do. And essentially, I haven't given you a story. I've given you a set of facts, which are, I don't know if you noticed, but Paul's van was parked outside Karen's house. So the way to give yourself permission is you better tell a better story than the one that the people are going to tell themselves. So that's one thing I would say about that. And then in terms of what were we talking about then? It was about sort of what is it about the other thing is inserting it into conversations. That's right. The one thing I would say about that is you need to earn the right to tell the story within a conversation or a presentation, because unlike real life, in business, there has to be a context and a relevance for your story. You can't suddenly, launch into a story and people going, why is this guy suddenly gone off on this route? What is the point he's trying to make? Totally in the opposite to what you would do in real life. If you were telling your child a bedtime story, you wouldn't tell them the moral at the beginning, but you sort of have to tell the moral at the beginning and sort of say, I've had many people like you in that situation, and I remember back in September 2019. Then you're into a story. Yeah. Don't say, I'm about to tell you a story about that, because we are all born with a very, especially in business, we're born with a very, very strong BS radar. And if you use the word story.
Right. It's the thing we are aspiring to do, to become storytellers. Exactly. But don't make it that obvious.
No, exactly right. And some people say to me culturally as well. I mean, I work with a lot of, and I apologize if there are any Germans watching this at the moment, but I've had people say, we work with Germans and they just want to deal with facts. Yeah, but they still have a neocortex, which is going to actually turn those facts into a story. So just don't tell them you're telling them the story.
Yeah, exactly. And I always tell everyone, If it's just facts, they probably have two computers talking to each other,
Yeah.
not people.
Yeah.
For that very reason that you brought up, David. Sorry,
I
Glenn.
know.
Well, that brings me around to a question that was bouncing around my head. But so thanks you for giving me the segue, David. With telling a story, how important is it to know your audience? Because the story that I tell Paul may accept, but it may be offensive to you or vice versa. So
Yeah.
before you tell that story, you might want to know how you're going to tell that story and who you're telling the story to.
I think you are risking your story dying immediately if you don't know your audience, and you have to really know them very well. Do you know, since you and I spoke last time, I've integrated into my work a system called the ABT framework. I'm not sure if I talked about that last time we were together.
I don't think so.
The ABT is it's fascinating. This is what I would call the DNA. This is the narrative structure that is at the heart of storytelling. ABT essentially stands for and, but, therefore, and it does three things which all stories have to do, which is it connects with people, it surprises people with a problem, and then it calms people down with a solution. So the first bit, in the and, you might say to something, hey, listen, Paul and Glenn, you've got a fantastic podcast here and a fantastic live, and you know you get wonderful results with it, and you're getting a lot of traction with it. But you've got a terrible guest on this Friday afternoon. He's called David Pullan, and you know he might completely screw this up for you. Therefore, I'm going to go and coach David Pullan beforehand just to make sure that he is absolutely the right thing. So what you're doing is you're nodding along, and Paul and Glenn are nodding and saying, yeah, we have got a great, you know, you get me, you understand exactly what we're trying to do. And then you smack him around the face and go, and you say, listen, you got a problem here because David Pullan is a terrible guest. And then you calm him down by saying, therefore, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually make it easier. I've scared Glenn off now. Oh, Paul, I've scared Paul off. So.
No,
Yeah,
I'm back. Go ahead, Glenn.
No, we just couldn't hear you. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Or I can go if you want.
No, you go ahead.
Shall I round that bit off? So essentially, I talked about narrative and the ABT structure, which actually was, if you want to go really technical about this goes right back to Aristotle, the 3-act structure of context, problem, resolution. But what it was actually formalized by a guy called Randy Olson, who lives in California, actually. And I've been in touch with him for about the last year now, and this has just changed my world in terms of storytelling. He teaches it very much in a scientific sense to try and make scientists better communicators. And he works with a lot of governments, agencies like Parks and Recreation, and he works with all sorts of people just helping their communication. And I've found that it is the best way to earn the right to tell a story, because with a good ABT, you're doing this, but this is going to happen, therefore I'm going to do this. Then people lean in and they go, so tell me how you do that. And then you're in, well, I remember I was working with David Pullan after he did a podcast about 3 weeks ago. And he said to me, listen, you know, and then you're off into a story.
So storytelling, some people are natural at it. Some people can attain it. Some people probably shouldn't try it. As someone that comes from a sales environment where you talk about type A personalities, and I've seen people that didn't have it, that tried to do it, and when they did it, we lost what we call here authenticity.
Yeah.
So how do we help people become better storytellers while still maintaining their authenticity?
What a fantastic question. I think what I'd go with that, where I'd go with that, Glenn, is almost back to what you started with a very nice a sort of mini insertion of a quote from Shakespeare's Twelfth Night there, as sort of saying some are born great, some are achieve great, and some have greatness thrust upon them. I'd almost go back to your comment that some should never attempt it. I think everyone should attempt it, but not everyone should think that, you know, I'm like you, I'm sitting here, I've got a few years under my belt, and I'm a fairly big personality, if you like, but that's not the only sort of storytelling. I'd really like people to be thinking that, you know, those I don't know how you put them up, the non-type A personalities who are maybe quieter, the introverts, they can be very, very powerful storytellers as well, because the nature of storytelling is if we think about it, there are two sorts of influence. There's a push influence. There's a push where you just push facts at people, and there's a pull influence where you pull people into what it is, into your facts, which are dressed up in a story form. And we all know that what happens with, if you push against something, something pushes back against it. I mean, it's basic physics. So that's why, if people want to go into battle and sort of like push their facts, good luck to them. But there's a softer way of influencing through the pull influence of storytelling, or incorporating storytelling and as I say, shaping your facts into a story shape. And I think that's really well suited to introverts as well. There's another thing I wanted to say about that, just before we move on. I work with a lot of people who they come to me because they want to become storytellers, but they're actually very nervous storytellers. What they're actually nervous of is being in the spotlight. They're nervous of being observed or being watched, and then the little, the voice, the little character on the shoulder goes, "You're rubbish at this, David. How on earth do you think anybody should listen to you?" So it's about that. They're afraid of being in the spotlight. The interesting thing about a well-told story is, well, let's take your example of the guy with the tattoo there, sort of saying, "I've got your tattoo there." I am looking at you at that moment, Glenn, but in actual fact, what I'm really focusing on is that picture of that guy threatening to throw himself off the top of the stadium with a tattoo on his arm. So a well-told story in some ways takes the spotlight off you. So if people aren't are afraid of being in the spotlight, learn to become a storyteller, because that takes the focus off you and the focus onto the storytelling. It's almost like some people call it, and in fact I call it, like Netflix of the mind. What's this thing in your head that you can see? How do you transfer it into the other person's head? And that can be done softly.
Well, I think a lot of people, when they feel, excuse me, when they feel that public speaking nervousness, a lot of it has to do with something that I term expert syndrome, which is when you step into the spotlight, you feel, in order to validate that you're actually there and that people should be listening to you, you have to be an expert. You have to inform them in some way. Convincing individuals how important stories are can be a little bit difficult. I know I go through it on a weekly basis, because I'm very big about understand the stories that define you. They become the prism through which you deliver almost any message.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's an interesting one then, that one, Paul. I think that that desire to be the expert there are a couple of things I think about that. As soon as we desire to be seen as the expert, we get into a position where we desire, it's almost like I need to impress people with my expertise.
Right.
And as soon as you put yourself in a position whereby you are trying to impress somebody, you have automatically put yourself in a subservient position. I am trying to sort of talk, please think I'm okay, please think I'm the expert.
Right.
We want to get into balance where we're partners, where don't seek to impress, seek to explain.
I think the circumstances, though, thrust us into that position. I just think feeling that energy of attention, sense of judgment, fear of consequences suddenly makes it feel like you've got to say something really important. And storytelling seems like the last option that you would take. Because again, storytelling seems like it's something more lighthearted, but it's not.
No, it absolutely isn't. I mean, storytelling isn't the answer to everything. Let's be honest about that. I mean, it is not the only way to crack nuts. I mean, but it's a pretty good way to crack most nuts. But it's if you think about it in terms of two circles, there's an inner circle and there's an outer circle. The inner circle are the people who share your expertise. You don't need to be telling stories to them, because you both share the same jargon, you share their understanding. You can actually throw some pretty difficult concepts at them and they will just understand them. If you were to tell them a story, you would probably be seen as being patronizing and a little bit BS-y. But people underestimate how big the outer circle is of people who don't really understand. And I've worked within industries where, there are people who are in the same firms, there are people in the same sections of the firm who, when you ask them to explain exactly what it is they're trying to achieve here, they can't really. They can't explain it. They are essentially in the outer circle, whereas everybody thinks they are on the inside. And so that is the point whereby you get a situation whereby you need to tell the story to explain that this is what it's going to look and sound like. I mean, I've had that literally in this last week. I was on a call with a client who I'm doing a big piece of work with, and it's I think on the brief it was said people just need to understand the process better and what the KPIs are going to be. And I said, so what do you actually mean by that? When you say process, what does that mean? And there was a sort of a, there was tumbleweed through the call as people couldn't actually, what, you can't picture a process. Just tell me what's going to happen. What's it going to look and sound like? And what are the events that will happen in that process? Who will do what to who? That's a story.
Well, I have a question. I think this is for both of you. How do we get people to understand that they're really not in front of a group or speaking to, whether it be two people, 20 people, 200 people? They're not there to impress. They're there to connect. Because if you don't connect with your audience, it doesn't matter what you're saying.
No, absolutely. Go on, Paul. You go first.
Well, I thoroughly agree with that. And I believe this is going to touch a little bit on what David had said earlier. I believe the first step in terms of that engagement is to make them think. And I don't mean logically, I mean in terms of curiosity. So I am a big fan of that bold statement right in the beginning that demands the answer, the unspoken question of how, what, why. Like you were saying before, David, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
So now already you've piqued curiosity. The problem being, of course, that very few people feel bold enough to deliver that statement right in the beginning and start the process of engagement right away. So usually you will hear somebody start off and use filler words and fluff and that sort of, well, I think what I really came here to talk about and I think you'd like to hear is, no, just go right into it. Just engage that part of my mind that's curious and needs to fill in the story, needs your assistance to help me feel satisfied filling in the story.
Yeah.
So start off with a really bold statement that begins that engagement process.
Yeah.
And then keep it clear. Just keep it very clear, like you were saying. Follow a very clear template of storytelling. And then repeat what you said in the beginning, paraphrase or verbatim. There's the takeaway.
Yeah. No, I think I'd agree with, well, I don't think, I know I agree with all of that. I mean, the other thing I would say is that that essentially what your audience's mind is doing at all times is it's pattern matching. It's trying to seek a what I'm hearing here. How does that match up into a pattern of what I've experienced or heard about before? And in terms of that connection idea, Glenn, I think it's about to give a story at the beginning of whatever it is, really bridges the, it crosses the chasm of understanding. I mean, there's a great example of that actually, which I've used sometimes with clients, and I've said, okay, I'm just going to say something to you now, and you tell me what I'm talking about. And I say, or air, and people go, what? What's that all about? I mean, and I said, it's just a bunch of vowels, isn't it? I mean, you just or air, and then I say, we see stories everywhere. And as soon as you add in the details, which is the story you would tell, as soon as I go or you go, oh, we see stories everywhere. You can't unhear it now. So you build the connection with the story, and people pattern match to that and go, oh, I get it. Okay, it's like magic.
It's a new phase of the business. Now you become the blank fillers, not just the story spotters, but the blank fillers.
The blank fillers, as in the number on the check.
Why not?
It's a business model.
Exactly. So I brought this up before in other Blabbie episodes, and let's do a deep dive. Let's do a deep dive on one of my favorite stories. And this goes into the bucket of stories that define you. And we all have one of these stories that I'm going to describe. I give it the categorical title of the mentor story.
Yeah.
And I think that it is an extremely disarming story. I think that it is an easy story for people to tell who don't like to talk about themselves because they're talking about somebody else.
Yeah.
But of course, anytime you're talking about somebody else, it's through your own prism, through your own lens. So you're really talking about yourself
Yeah.
is what's going on. So does that find a place at all in the storytelling that you work on, that specific story? Have you had any experiences with that?
I think probably 75% of the time I'm working on that sort of story, because and if people don't come with that sort of story, I work in a lot of sales things, and one thing I say to people is nobody really cares about your story. What they care about is how you make their story better. So and that's one of the, I think that's at the heart of sales, actually. So to tell a story whereby you are the hero, is you have to position yourself as the mentor, and I have a number of those stories that I tell myself about my experience of working with people, where it's not really my success, it's the success of others that have come into that. But I think that's incredibly powerful, and to get people away from that idea that it's not you're not Luke Skywalker, you're Obi-Wan Kenobi in this.
But then you can also flip it around and talk about someone who was your mentor.
You absolutely can.
And
You
that's very
absolutely
disarming
can.
too.
Yeah, it is. In fact, I was talking to somebody. Very interestingly, I was talking to a guy yesterday who lives in North Carolina, and he's from the States originally, but he lived in Asia for about 15 years. And I said to him yesterday, I told him the story about where my name, the Story Spotters, came from, which is absolutely 100% down to him. I mean, I rebranded 2 years ago during the beginning of COVID, and it's transformed my business so much, just that simple rebrand and the change of name. And it was down to him. So he was essentially the catalyst and the mentor, for my current success. People love hearing that.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I hope he did. I just hope he doesn't want any money for it. He can tell that story.
You know what's interesting? For some reason, my ears are working today, and I'm listening to different things you guys are saying. And it brings me back to a time and place when doing some sales consulting, helping a sales team reach an objective. And I think from the beginning, coming in, as Paul would say, all of you guys are going to make your objective on this campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's taking that time, once you get that shock and awe, if you will, to then start the storytelling to find out, are you good at retention? Are you good at increasing people's spend? Are you good at acquiring new business? Because at the end, all that matters is the end number, not how you get to that end number.
Yeah.
And then get people to find out what they're good at, appreciating what they're good at, and accentuating what they're good at, and then maybe trying to improve a little bit on what they're not as good at. Yeah. So can you take storytelling, apply KPIs, and still have a good meeting, a good presentation, and get people where they need to go?
Oh, I personally think you have to. I mean, I work a lot with tech startups who are pitching for their money, pitching for funding for, whether it's early angel stage money or it's, Series A, Series B, that sort of stuff. And you absolutely, you can't tell a story without numbers in it. You absolutely have to. And I mean, there's a sort of an unwritten rule that don't say more than about 2 sentences unless there's a big number attached to it. So I think that you absolutely can give KPIs, data points, key markers, whatever it is, within the story. And in fact, you have to, because what it is facts are the language of business. They are the language of business. Undoubtedly they are. Data is the language of business. It just isn't what wins it for you. I mean, no, but it's you've got to turn that language into the story. That's what I'm saying. It's like they are the words that you deal with on a day-to-day basis. Put them into a story shape and tell them very well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, do you think that leaders need, because they are projecting, communicating the 40,000-foot view very often,
mm-hmm.
Do you think that their stories need to be more concise, or less concise or more elaborate? In other words, shorter, cleaner? And Glenn, this is sort of the idea of making sure we get everyone on the same page, again, with like open doors. What do you guys think? What do you think about that as leaders? Do they need to distill things down more?
That's a very good thing. Shall we go with that first? I think the idea is what I would say is you're right. I mean, leaders by their very nature are giving an overview, a big view, which still has a narrative structure. I mean, let's think of change programs. I mean, in the past things were like this, but then this happened. Therefore, we have to operate like this in the future. I mean, that's the 35,000 feet operational view of things, which is great. It works. It says we were very successful in the past, but then this happened. Therefore, we have to try and refine some of our mojo from the past or reinvent ourselves, whatever it is. But that in itself isn't going to move hearts and minds. That's a logical narrative structure, which I think can and should be very tight. That in itself should be very tight. What I would say is the stuff that lodges and gets retold is what I would call the moments. It's like the things where you dive down into, where, to quote the musical Hamilton, you put people in the room where it happened. I mean, because nobody remembers what we remember moments. We remember Michael Corleone saying, "I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse," or we remember Roy Scheider on the back of the boat saying, "We're going to need a bigger boat." We remember those moments, and I think the more that leaders can take us to the back of that boat, or take us to Michael Corleone saying, "I'm going to make him an offer they can't refuse," people in action within that overarching narrative, I think those need to be chosen and put into practice very well by leaders, because that's what gets retold by people.
Well, and I think it's important for the people in between the workers and the leader then to come back in after the leader's given the mission statement, this let's go type of thing, to say, okay, this is what Paul wants. This is how we're going to do it, to break it down into bite-sized pieces to obtain the goal.
Exactly right.
If we don't have bite-sized pieces, we never make that big goal, because the rings on the ladder were too large for us to reach the next one.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I think I often say, nobody was taught to kill a bison by PowerPoint. It was by a story, I mean, so actually sort of people, and my wife heard one the other day that if the Sermon on the Mount had been written by consultants, nobody would be a Christian now. So, I mean, so I think that, I mean, those, which I think is fantastic. And I think it's, to get that story put together is incredibly important, because it's what cascades through a business, and it teaches people. Facts don't teach people. The story teaches people about what the new change of behavior needs to be. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Well,
I've killed the conversation.
No, we're just
story.
Is there a story that are there story forms? All right, let's try this.
Yeah.
How many different story forms are there in reality? Even though every story is very, very unique, what would you say are the top story structures? I know you gave us the ABT format that you're using, but I mean, not every story about going on vacation has to be a day-to-day travel log.
No, exactly.
In fact, very rarely is that even the best way to tell a story. It's not off limits.
No,
but that would be one of those chronological storytelling moments. Are there story forms that you run into more often than others?
Well, I think that I think the one that you mentioned before, the mentor story, or the success pattern, if you like, which is the one that really stands out for me as probably being maybe even 75-80% of the stories which are told, which are and I'm talking very much in the business world here. So I mean, I'm talking about client had a problem, was introduced to me. Together we sorted out the solution. They came up against some problems while they were doing it, and in the end succeeded. So I mean, that's a very, very powerful That's a very, very powerful pattern, which I see used, especially because I do work in sales a lot. I work on big global pitches with organizations, and I encourage them to use that story a lot about how did a previous client succeed as a result of meeting you, and what was the journey to that. People talk about the origin stories, but there needs to be a good reason. I mean, how were you formed? I mean, with startups, to be fair, I mean, that's quite an interesting one, because it's actually, as I think about it, something I've been saying to people, the whole Simon Sinek, people buy you because of your why. I've been working recently with a lot of education people. In fact, I'm about to do a program with a bunch of education people, and what I really like about them is that everyone that I've spoken at universities and places like that is that they all have a why. There's a really big why that drives. Why are they educators? Why do they do it? So the origin story of how you came to be doing what you do is a great connecting story. Interestingly enough, I did a big program with a pharmaceutical company throughout Europe about 3 years ago on a breast cancer drug. And it was, they'd found their overarching narrative of what it is they were trying to achieve with storytelling. And my job was to find the stories which were the decorations to hang off that narrative. And pharma gets a bad rap. I mean, we all go, it's like tax and things like that. If somebody comes into the room they go, oh, you're one of those people, are you?
Mhm.
I did not meet a single person in that industry who wasn't there for a very good reason. I was working, this was their specialism was oncology. So I mean, it was they were all there for very, very powerful personal reasons. And that well, as I say, 3 or 4 years later, that's a lot of those stories still stick with me, and I could tell them off the top of my head now because they were so heartfelt as well. So I think the success pattern is the most useful one. The change pattern, I think I alluded to it before, which is, in the past we used to do this, but then this has happened, therefore we need to be thinking about this for the future. That change pattern to clarify the need for change is a very powerful pattern as well.
Okay.
Do you think they're kind of similar to closing techniques? So basically, if you're not a natural born storyteller, if you're not great at multiple closing techniques, finding the one that works well for you and repeating that one over and over again until you build that acumen up a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Do you know, if I go back to the ABT as well, because I talked about the and, but, therefore as a great way to open, the narrative structure to open, to earn the right to tell the story, because people go, all right, so tell me how you're going to do that then. I was working with an insurance company recently over here in the UK, and it was with their salespeople about using story within sales. And we talked about the ABT right at the beginning. And one of the guys, who's a very, very, very successful person already, said, you know what, this would be a fantastic way to close a meeting as well. So if you're in a sort of, a discovery meeting with people, you get to them and sort of say, okay, so what I've heard is that what you're trying to achieve is this and this, and if you get it, then this will happen. But this is in the way for you. So therefore, what we're going to do is go away and plan this for you and come back to you. And I could have kissed him. I thought that is absolutely great. What a great way to close an initial, any part of the sales process actually is just sort of say, this is what we've done for you.
Well, the way that you start often can be the way that you finish as well.
Absolutely true.
Which is, again, driving home that takeaway. Let's talk a little bit about storytelling, not about content.
Yep.
Let's talk about delivery. And let's talk about how important body language is in terms of telling a story. And again, I go back to the comparison that if you were sitting on a bar stool, you would probably be more animated than you would give yourself permission to be in a business meeting. However, our minds still work the same way, whether we've had a cocktail or two or not. And we still do respond to body language, that being eye contact, facial expressions, posture, gesturing, all the 4 important components. Do you touch on that with your clients as well?
Absolutely.
In terms of delivery?
Yeah, yeah, very much so. I mean, the four areas of as story spotters that we do is the first is what stories do you need to be spotting and shaping and telling to people, which is what we're predominantly talking about here. The second element is what stories do people infer about you through your behaviors, which is what you're talking about here. So it's about like when you show up in the room or on the call, what are people inferring about you purely and simply by how you've shown up? The third thing is how do you get stories out of other people so that you deepen a relationship just beyond the transactional. You actually really connect with people because you listen to their stories. And the last thing, which is what are the stories you're telling yourself about yourself, which is that are going to help your success, which is to do with the values that I was talking about earlier. But yeah, we spend a lot of time on, I've heard some great stories that have absolutely died because they haven't been told well. And so we do absolutely talk about that. And we've got some pretty simple tips that because I think everyone's like in the same way that people fear the Hollywoodization of business. And like, if I tell stories, is it going to sound I've gone Hollywood? People don't want to be an actor either. They want to, they want to know that you're a real, genuine, authentic human being who is just imparting some information to people. So yeah, I have got a couple of Shall I tell you my favorite one?
Please do, David.
Why not? We're here. We're doing nothing else on a Friday. I have to introduce you to I've just seen it. It's here, actually. It's what's reminded me. This is like an improv. I feel like, what's that old film, The Usual Suspects, where you understand that somebody's just made something up based on what they're seeing around them. And it's,
yes.
I've done that essentially. This is my favorite piece of coaching. It's a piece of string. And I always say to people that, if you ever played that game when you were a kid where you get 2 empty tin cans and you tie them together with the string and go, hi, can you hear me, Paul and Glenn? You go, that's amazing. I can hear you. It only works because the string is tight. And I say with storytelling, your job is to make sure that from the moment you open your mouth to the moment that you shut your mouth, the string between you and the audience is as tight as it possibly can be. And if it goes slack, then your story isn't being listened to. And to keep it tight can either be because your story isn't well structured and it's rambling and sort of like going all over the place and people can't see what the point is, or it could be that you're just not telling it very well. And the basic element I say to people is you've got to discover, I'm not sure if I said this to you before when we talked, discovering your inner UFO. Does that ring any bells with you? No. I'm sort of good. That's a good thing. Discovering your inner UFO stands for three things, funnily enough: upright, forward, and open. And upright is about sitting upright, just using the length of your body, looking like you're standing upright, looking like you want to be there. What that does is it gets your energy up and it releases. It's a bit like a hose pipe. If you're trying to water your garden, you don't want, if you kinked over like that, the water can't get up. Use your length so that your energy and your breath and your sound can get out. The other thing is it brings your energy up a bit, and what that tends to do is it frees your arms up so that you can just actually give your energy to other people, which is where the forward comes in. Because in terms of that, keeping that string tight, if I went backwards like this, then it looks, the string automatically looks a bit slack. It's like I don't really want to be there. And if I come into a neutral position like that, yeah, I mean, it's okay. But if you get forward, then you look as if you really want to be there. So imagining that forward drive of energy. And there's a wonderful guy in Canada called Mark Bowden, who you may have come across on LinkedIn. He's a body language expert. And the tip he has is, he says, imagine you've got a door frame around you and you have three choices. You can either be behind the doorway, where you're like that, and it's like, you look a bit sort of, disengaged, or you can be in the middle of the doorway and people can interpret. You look, yeah, that's fine, he's there. Or just get just in front of that doorway. Get your ears in front of the doorway. That makes you look as if you actually really want to be there. Get some enthusiasm and energy into it. So that's the upright and forward. And the open is just about using your width. I mean, we read, for very good evolutionary reasons, we read into it. It's like, is this person threatened, or are they concealing something? Show people you're a friend. Get open. Use that width of your body. Get upright, forward, and open, and that will. It doesn't have to be over the top at all, but those three things will make people look like you don't want to be anywhere else except right here, right now, telling this story.
Right, in the moment.
In the moment. That's what it's about.
So I have a question I know is near and dear to Paul's heart. So when you're telling the story, let's talk about the necessity almost always of the pause.
Oh yeah.
The master of the pause for
Right.
many good reasons. For many good reasons, primarily because we have to consider that people need some time to process. They need some time to, as David said earlier, just rattle through the Netflix of images that you are conjuring up. Give them an opportunity to latch. And that pause is very important for that reason. That's reason number one.
Mm.
Reason number two is because as empathetic listeners, as people who do want to be taken on a journey, we absolutely do. We always do pay much more attention to whatever comes right after silence.
Yes, we do. We do.
We do. It's one of those, it's like a dog whistle. Just like, what? You can't overuse it, but one of the problems, of course, is when we are, number one, excited about telling a story. Number two, concerned about keeping people's interest. Number three, feeling a little bit of nerves about being in the spotlight.
Yep.
There's a tendency to speak too quickly. And therefore, we're doing a disservice to our listeners. And it's an interesting question that you bring up, Glenn, because this does tie into what we were just talking about in terms of body language. And I wanted to bring up that body language can be, and certainly is for most people, good storytellers, the unspoken continuity.
Yeah.
So how do you fill up that pause without just going,
yeah,
and then starting again? And it comes down to utilizing your body language, being very deliberate about your breathing, which is actually an aspect of body language, even though it doesn't seem like it is, because it sends a message. Anything that you do that sends a message is a form of that body language. So I have an interesting story. If I can just take a little tangent. I was
you
actually
speak my language.
Yes,
Wow.
yes, exactly. Thank you, Glenn. I was working with a client. You know I'm going to do it anyway. So I was working with a client just earlier this week, and we were talking about this very thing, about gesturing, about exploring different gestures, how you expand your palette of gestures. And I know one of the things, two of the very simple ones that he wasn't considering, and most people don't, is we have a tendency, our intuition is that we're trying to connect, we're trying to reach, we're giving a presentation, we're giving a speech, we're sharing our perspective. There's always going to be this pull to go like this.
Yeah.
And I said, to make sure that you have the right variety of body language, start gesturing in.
Yeah.
Not all the time, but vary, even though you're going to be doing this, and even find times where you can turn your hands over.
Yeah.
And most people don't even think of that.
No,
but how often do we say, I'm never going to do that again?
Well, do you know the interesting point that you bring up there, Paul, is that's what I would call a symbolic gesture. I mean, if you think there are symbolic and functional gestures, that is, I'm never doing it. That is a symbolic gesture of, that's never going to happen. The functional gestures are about you allowing yourself to use your body to help almost draw the picture for people. So it's like, we got a team in New Jersey and we got a team in Omaha, and somehow we got to bring those two guys together. I mean, it's and it's about drawing what the thing is. And so I often get people to imagine that how do you use these things as and draw on that palette in front of you.
Mm-hmm. And here's the other one that I have gotten over the years. Where do I put my hands when I'm not gesturing? And that's like the age-old question. You're never not gesturing. Once you start, you just flow right into the next. And that's another thing that most people don't know. This same client said to me, somewhere in my education, somebody told me that I gestured too much. Yeah. And so therefore I really pulled it back. And I said, no, what they didn't recognize, and this is what happens when you get poor advice, because we all know when we see something we don't like. We all know when we see something we do like. Very rarely do we really understand why.
Yeah. No,
and to bring up his experience, somebody had told him he was gesturing too much, mainly because he was what we call flailing is
Yeah,
gesturing.
yeah,
And I
absolutely.
said that the key to good gesturing technique is to hold one gesture until the impulse for the next
I,
gesture comes along.
I agree. Perfect.
And most people don't know that, but once they start to practice it, it becomes second nature, and therefore their unspoken continuity, they really add a lot of gravitas to the things that they're speaking about.
That's lovely. I think that's really, really good advice. It's interesting. If you're, I mean, if they many years ago, I was asked by quite a famous retired golfer now to help him with his corporate speaking. And I remember I went to one event that he was talking at, and somebody said to him, somebody said to him, so if I'm standing on the 17th and there's water running down the right-hand side, how do I make sure I don't go in the water? And he said, if you're focusing on the water, you're focusing on the wrong thing. And I think with storytelling, if people are focusing on their gestures, they're focusing on the wrong thing, which goes back to your thing about the pausing, which is, the pause does the opportunity within the pause to reground yourself, to take a breath, is wonderful. It's also an opportunity to get the best feedback you'll ever get in the world, which is from your audience. Look them in the eye. Are they still connected? Is that string tight? Use that pause to think, what do I need to do next in order to keep that string tighter?
Yeah.
Well, next time we're going to schedule this for a day meeting versus an hour meeting because we have too much.
Are we done? It's not fair.
Yeah, but you know what? It always allows us to invite David back.
I'm gonna come.
That's the caveat there.
Now we're allowed to fly again. I'm coming over there. We'll do this live in the room.
There you go.
You're gonna find Glenn first.
If someone would like to reach out to you, David, what's the best way to do so?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, so David Pullan on LinkedIn. Please do connect with me on there. The Story Spotters has a page. We're on Twitter as the Story Spotter because it was too long as the Story Spotters, and we are the Story Spotters on Instagram as of about a week ago as well. So any of those, the Story Spotters and David Pullan, will find me most places.
Well, thank you very much. This has been a great, enjoyable conversation.
I've loved it. Yeah.
Oh, always fantastic to see you, David. You always bring so much energy and interesting insight, and I'm sure that our audience is very appreciative. Thank you
very much.
All right, everyone. We'll see you next week.